I want to give thanks to all those who have made the passage from ships in Liverpool that have brought us to where we are today. People that we celebrate in this forum, of course, James, Marcus Garvey, Eric Williams, all those Pan-African intellectuals whose names pop up today and will tomorrow as well. I want to give thanks to them. And I want to say thanks, of course, very directly, first of all to Raj Chetty, was the person that thought that the work was worth remembering. One does work and that's it, you know. And secondly, to my dear friend Rachel, who, in putting this conference together on Black Jacobins, gave us space for the play itself, the drama. And in saying that, I also just want to mention that, from my approach, C.L.R. James and drama is not only the play. That may be the only play that he wrote. But I view his language. He says he's not dramatic, but I think he is. Mm-hmm. His language has the clarity and precision of dialogue. He writes for delivery, not so much for reading, for delivery. He writes to persuade. And of course, he's a great storyteller. So we've done other work around his work, dramatizing his work. It's very easy. What I want to do this short time that we have is give you some sense of the context of the three productions that I was involved with. The first question to my mind that we have to answer is, how come the play written in 1936 was not done in the Caribbean until 1975? I have three possible reasons for that. One, of course, in the colonial time, the colonial period in the Caribbean, there was no social, theatrical infrastructure, if you wish. In Trinidad, most of the groups were expatriate groups to support the production of a play like Toussaint Louverture, as it was in those days. Jamaica may be the exception, in that Jamaica, from very early, from the 1940s or so, went its own way, and Jamaicans, being as feisty as they are, of course, took the theatre and did what they wanted with it. Great people. The play wasn't known, and that's the second point. It wasn't known generally in the Caribbean. I think the third point is that it couldn't be done before 1975 because I was not yet ready. As a young student on campus, when I got back to Jamaica, and with the university there, we just did it. History can't be changed, so whatever else has to be documented, we've got to document the work of those young students, and I give thanks to them and all the cast, because as you know, theatre is always collaborative. I also recognize all the cast who've worked in all the productions today. But we need to understand, because I call this talk Dechoukaj, and how the play, Black Jacobins, liberates Caribbean theatre. So therefore we need to understand the context. Also want to declare that I see the play and the productions of the play as facilitating a certain aesthetic. But in terms of context, that first production, 1975, benefited from what happened in the Caribbean in 1968, in the late 60s, Black Power. When I got to Jamaica for the first time in 1970, Walter Rodney had already been banned. There were protests against his banning in 1968. The Creative Arts Center where we performed had been occupied in 1968 by students who felt that they had been marginalized in terms of getting their work done at that university center. But the influence of Walter Rodney was particularly key. Because what Rodney did was that he radicalized intellectual life in the Caribbean. And there was a dialogue that was established, the intellectual groundsing, as we call it in Jamaica at that time, with the community, and therefore understanding the community interests and the community needs, and of course, the community also being taught in certain formal ways, as Rodney did, their own history, and so on, being given that kind of breadth of vision. It was a marvelous period. By 1975, There were no longer obstacles to student work being done at the Creative Arts Center. We had very facilitative professors, Rex Nettleford. So there was no problem in doing work that we call experimental, which meant that we could take risks and not necessarily have to pay for it. Productions didn't have to make money. It would be nice if they did, but that didn't stop us from doing what we wanted to do. All that stood out for me now was really the location of it. We had the use of the formal stage, but we chose not to do it there. We did it in the round. So from those days, we were looking at alternative forms because, frankly, my own view of Caribbean theatre is that it's largely elitist. That's the tradition that it has grown out of. In Trinidad, it was largely a middle-class affair. They said Jamaica was different. They claimed it very early, but in Trinidad, it was largely a middle-class affair. So we were always trying to find alternative spaces. The second production, 1979, by that time I had gone back to Trinidad and established the Trinidad version of a phenomenon that again came out of the 1960s and 70s in Jamaica called yard theatre. It was led by Marina Maxwell, Marina Omowali Maxwell. Right? And Marina, having experienced Rodney era and so on, had in fact written a series of productions that she did outside of the formal structures in country places. In her own house, I think she started in her own yard, and she called it yard theatre. It was really a coming together. It wasn't just a question of space, it was also a coming together of roots artists, people like Mortimer Planner, who was a Rastafari drummer, very powerful actor. Edward Kamau Graffit was there, very much part of it, and so on. It was built on the ideology that Rodney, I think, had established. So there was that influence, and I took it, brought it to Trinidad, and expanded it in certain ways, so that when we did our play, Black Jacobins in 1979, in fact, that was the culmination of a series of works that we had done exploring this yard aesthetic. We did a production of Agamemnon, I recall, by Aeschylus, but using Indian dance drama. And we also played in traditional spaces. We brought together very experienced actors with neophytes, people who, there was no training institution happening in Trinidad. So we trained through the productions. So that in Black Jacobins in 1979, for instance, we had Errol Jones in the lead role, who was our famous actor trained by Derek Walcott. Errol Jones and Claude Reed. Claude Reed played Dessalines. And we performed that show at QRC, which is, of course, James's alma mater. I think James was there on the final night, I don't think. James was there on the final night. We saw this show, and I recall the actors, everybody at the end of the show just rushing toward him, and he was there complimenting that. The third production, and the context for that, 1993, was Aristide, actually. Aristide, I call that the Aristide production because Aristide had been deposed by Cephas and the Americans, and democracy was being threatened. And there was a support group formed in Trinidad. The group was called HASTE, and it was about the restoration of democracy in Haiti. Again, using the yard philosophy or ideology, if you wish, we got together with a community group, my students, the campus, and created this production. And we located the action in contemporary Haiti at that time. So it was really about a group of Haitians under threat. It was really about how does one continue to create under these circumstances? How does one continue to survive under these circumstances when the leaders are taken? Yeah? And it's a phenomenon that we need to understand, I think, in terms of Black diasporic studies. But that's what it was about. I want to close by saying that coming from where I come from in the Caribbean, there's a sense in which when we engage, whether through theater or through fora like these, with Caribbean realities, there's a sense of past, present, and future that I want to leave us with. Past is the continuity. Is the understanding that we are connected with our ancestors. Present is the necessity, and this is not a comment on this, but this is an understanding that when we're discussing the Caribbean has to be here. And that, in a way, is just to recognize that no discussion of this subject is complete without Haiti, without the voice of Haiti. And this is not a criticism thing, because I know that this is not a criticism. This is just saying that it's a recognition that I think we all need to have. That the Haitian view of black Jacobins, of their own revolution, is absolutely essential. And the future, because we're talking about continuities, there's no separation. The group that we worked with made a point that, look, Haiti, like Grenada and like Cuba and Suriname at the time or wherever, was all important in terms of Caribbean responsibility. I disagreed, because I felt that Haiti stood on its own. It is not just a Caribbean responsibility. It is for the Caribbean, it is Caribbean redemption. It is the only way, to my mind, that the Caribbean can come in contact with itself, can deal with issues of sovereignty, can deal with shaping an identity for the future. Haiti is a lodestar. All our writers, all our major writers, including Naipaul, have had to deal with Haiti. Yeah. So we recognize that, and we recognize that that redemption that we seek has to come through the engagement with Haiti. So there's only one question facing us. What do we, as a community here, conference, do in relation to that? That's the only question.
Our last very distinguished speaker for this evening is Yvonne Brewster, OBE, originally from Jamaica, founder of Talawa Theatre Company, Britain's first black theatre company, and also the Barn Theatre in Jamaica. And she was director of the 1986 London production of C.L.R. James's The Black Jacobins play. And I think with what Rawle's just been saying, and also the fact that Rawle's title is Dechoukaj, and about creative liberation, one thing to say about Yvonne's production in 1986 is that it happened in February 1986. And February 1986, I read the press releases in the Talawa archives, and this is the very moment when Jean-Claude Duvalier goes. And I remember Yvonne telling me in email correspondence that overnight there was the Haitian consulate or something. Yeah. They went overnight. But this, I mean, in terms of what was happening in Haiti then in 1986, it was very relevant. Yes. So can we please welcome Yvonne?
Good evening, everybody. I'm not accustomed to so many academics. I am just a straightforward practitioner. And so if what I say is not very deep and meaningful, forgive me. I'm doing the best I can. I'm going to even read. I was so terrified of standing up here. Okay, from page to stage. Finding the page. My interest in historical plays of the Caribbean began as a school project in Jamaica in the 1950s. We could only find mention of 4 plays. 2 by St. Lucian Derek Walcott, Henri Christophe, which he called A Chronicle, the Corruption of Slaves into Tyrants, not to be discussed. Second one, Drums and Colors, a Pageant, Conquest and Rebellion. And then there was one by Trinidadian C.L.R. James called Toussaint Louverture, and one by a Jamaican, Roger Mays, George William Gordon, a historical play in 14 scenes. It was the 1985 rebellion that he was talking about. Our teacher quoted some lines she thought came from the play. All things are at the beginning is the end. But that was the only snippet we got, as none of the plays were to be found in printed form. In other words, we never had the chance to read them. Bit of an anticlimax. Remember, this was in the 1950s. But I determined to find the script of at least one of these plays. At my boarding school in the hills of the parish of St. Anne, St. Hilda's Diocese, the city that is set on a hill, no less, history usually meant the history of the British Isles as taught by ladies from Yorkshire. It is difficult perhaps to appreciate these days the widespread shock at the approval of a project for black history. So what's that? My brave teacher was stuck on the idea of the gallant Toussaint, and her enthusiasm fired mine. Some call it my golden fleece period. It is unfortunate, just to say this in passing, that the publishing of works by Caribbean playwrights has never been a priority for anybody. Far too many of our best-loved playwrights, it has been a struggle seeing their works in print. Thus, the hunt for and the finding of the page has often been a more exhausting exercise than it might appear to the casual observer. In the case of the play script, The Black Jacobins, this was further complicated by the sharing of the name between book and play, especially when the play had begun its life with a different title. To quickly recap, and I'm not sure if we really need that, so I think I'm going to skip it, because I was going to go in 1936, the play entitled Toussaint was there, and then coming on, and in 1967, but we've heard about that. But somewhere between 1967 and 1976, James gave this, you might even call it, new version of the only play he ever wrote into the safe hands of yet another Trinidadian, the late Professor Errol Hill, who took the opportunity of the Carifesta Festival held in Jamaica in 1976 to publish it under the imprint of the Extramural Studies Unit of the University of the West Indies in Trinidad. This very limited edition remains the only published version, as far as I know, of the play The Black Jacobins. For those unfamiliar with Carifesta, in 1972, some 26 Caribbean nation states decided to collaborate on an arts festival of the region to be held in Guyana. That was Carifesta, and very successfully proved. So much so, it was decided that one of the contributing nation states would present a similar festival, and despite a trembling economy, 4 years later, in 1976, the Michael Manley government decided to keep its promise. I was invited by Carifesta's Director General, the late Wycliffe Bennett, to, as he put it, take charge of the drama, madame, which meant one of the most informative months of my life, as I traveled all over the Caribbean, from the Dutch-speaking islands through the French and the Spanish, of course the English, choosing and approving the individual entries. It's not the easiest of tasks, as you may imagine, because everybody wanted to go and some things were not that great. Anyway, but Wycliffe was keen to have something tangible, as he called it, after all the fuss of performance had died down. Something tangible, a book of plays. He asked his friend, Errol Hill, to edit a collection of Caribbean plays as a memento of the Jamaican Carifesta. A time and a season was the result. 8 Caribbean plays. Nestling at the very end of this collection was a play, The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James. For me, it was my eureka moment, because I was in England when the production was on and I didn't know about it. After 20 years, in fact, Professor Hill also included in a time of the season another of the plays that we had searched for at school all those years ago, George William Gordon by Roger Mays. So 2 found, 2 to go, but the others by Derek Walcott were published. I soon realized that the 1967 date and the different title meant I may have found a version of the play, but not the original manuscript. Anyway, I determined to produce it. It was so wonderful. And I had to do it somehow. And I was working in England. However, the only viable opportunity presented itself 1 decade later, sometime in 1985, with a phone call from Lord Burkitt's office of the Greater London Council, which was facing the axe of Margaret Thatcher's spite and would soon be no more. The gist of the call was something like this. Look, we're being closed down, but there is money in the drama budget which needs to be spent. We have loads of applications which we're processing, but nothing from you. Can't you get something in within the next couple of days? You know, these things take me about 6 months to write. Anyway, I do have an idea for a project, I said. Well, I always have an idea for a project, but be warned, this one needs big money. Shut up, said Lord Burkitt, and write it up, now. So I did. The Black Jacobins project, with 23 members of cast, properly paid, above equity, a full 6 weeks rehearsal period, a proper venue, money for a decent set, costumes, Irish is expensive and we needed many period uniforms, the whole 9 yards, proper marketing and publicity. The bottom line in money came up to something in the region of £80,000. This is a phenomenal amount for subsidy for a long-forgotten black play in London. It still is, I'm told. It took a couple of nights without sleep to write this up, and I did actually forget to put an income stream. Some say this was deliberate, I say it was accidental. In a few days, another phone call. Oh, the money's yours. It was like that those days. I had to quickly form a theatre company because my husband said if it didn't work, he's not selling the house. Talawa Theatre Company was founded simply to produce C.L.R. James' play, The Black Jacobins. However, there was one great obstacle. I did not have permission to produce the play. Having found the page, the next hurdle was the permission to enable it onto the stage. In those days of the 80s, there used to be a very successful annual international third world and radical book fair organized by the inimitable John LaRose of the George Padmore Institute, I think he started it, which many influential international artists and writers would attend and launch books and chat and whatever. Darcus Howe was always there, and I approached him, trying not to be too disempowered by his mighty stare, in an attempt to get access to CLR. He, Darcus, as his nephew, was a sort of gatekeeper. He was rather grand, but constant questions, where away attitude. I was finally allowed to meet C.L.R. James in order to seek his permission to produce his play, The Black Jacobins. It must be said he put me through the literary ringer, politically too. I made 1 or 2 unforgivable errors in his eyes, including giving Dessel too much credit. Woman, the next thing you will say is your hero is Idi Amin. But he was amused that here was this woman with all this money, wanting to put his play on stage after half a century, only now, at the 11th hour, seeking his permission. he made the point that usually people came along with great, lofty ideas of changing the world, but no money to do it with. The novelty kind of amused him, and it persuaded him. We had a gentle but wary relationship. I had to, I wanted to, get permission for every change in the dialogue, in the order of scenes, and so on. And I have to say, there were many. In retrospect now, that I have the opportunity of reading 1936 play, noting in the publication how different the scene synopses are from the actual text, that there must have been many changes made them too, before it got onto the stage. In our case, some 50 years later, even when theatre had changed so much from the 30s and even the 60s, I had to make a cogent case to Nello at any changes I proposed. It seemed to me that although the play was stirring politically on the page, in theatre you need more than rhetoric, more than long speeches, sometimes overwritten for stage purposes. The play is long, and there were a number of places in which we wanted to bring it alive with sound and song and movement to avoid a too obvious history lesson. For instance, I had to make a watertight case in the defense of the retention of the scenes with Madame Boulet, which were due for the chop, as they didn't add anything significant, or as Hill says in his notes, held up the action while contributing little of value to the play. Well, my winning argument was that there are two love stories in the text, Dechoukaj and Jean-Marie, and Toussaint and Louise Boulet. These, I felt, provided a more emotionally rounded play. You know, audiences like somebody to relate to in their own particular way. However, every change, every idea was listened to and eventually passed, quite enthusiastically, it must be said, by Nello, which I've been instructed to call him by then. Call me Nello. I so look forward to his reasoning that I may have asked for audience more often than was strictly necessary. A lovely mind's eye memory is of him sitting in the window at the angle most certain to provide the best light as he pondered on his painting of the day. There was an easel on which a quite large reproduction of a painting was hoisted. Each day, the subject changed. I seem to remember Renoir being one of his favorites. The umbrellas by the Seine on Brixton Hill. So the page was found, the changes agreed, the permission granted. Onto the stage. We were very nervous. In Britain then, black people were not expected to produce this size of show. In the United Kingdom at that time, the norm was, if not the two-hander, at best the 5 or 6-hander. Think of Alfred Fagan, Mustafa Matura, Michael Abinsets, all women, all men. No women were writing in those days, apparently. All of whom have a distinguished history of writing plays which got on stage during the late 70s and 80s, with casts averaging out at about 5 or 6 actors. For me, it was said, I was told, the responsibility was of coming up with the goods, exhibiting the highest of production values, not running away with the money. Many people thought this might happen. It was a lot of money. Getting the very top of the tree professionals in acting, design, costume, movement, music, marketing, publicity to sign up was a great challenge, a tall order from with no previous history of having produced a play in this country. An anecdote. We had to hire a great number of period costumes for Napoleon, Spanish general, etc., etc. Toussaint, Madame Blais, okay. And we had booked these in good time. When the stage manager went to collect them, the administration of the Irish firm would not give them to her without a hefty deposit, the fee paid in full, in cash, in advance, hundreds of pounds. Even then they didn't want to give it to us. They hadn't realized it was a black outfit doing the hiring. In casting the show, however, the gods were with us. Norman Beaton was the first to sign up, he being the leading black actor at the time. This meant I could be ambitious with the others. Mona Hammond, Gary MacDonald, Trevor Laird, Jenny Jules, Brian Bovell. The list was really quite impressive, actually. And amongst they gave such sterling performances. I had to deal with a lot of Jeremiahs. One learns to be deaf when necessary. I was able to say, without fear of contradiction, that Norman Beaton was the most professional actor I'd had the pleasure of working with, and I'm always grateful, as with his deportment, never late, always line perfect, studious, stylish. He set the tone for the rehearsals. In fact, the cast, often 23 of them, stood up when he entered the room. I don't think that sort of thing happens these days, but then it made my life very much easier. Andrea Montag's set used the entire 72 feet of stage. I don't know the European thing, but 72 feet is something in meters. Okay. She stripped back all the old black cloth and revealed the brickwork and the marvelous arches from which were suspended enormous flags of France, Spain, and Great Britain. On the floor, in Artek, was a representation of Ezule, which Jamaican choreographer Tommy Pinnock, on loan from the Alvin Ailey Company, and I'm very grateful to them in the United States, used to terrifying effect in the voodoo scenes. The rehearsals went well, with Norman heading up the cast, reminding them that they were expected to fail, but we won't, you know. He was very grand. He was lovely, actually. But, in fact, they didn't bargain for the buzz. They didn't bargain on Mark Bukowski. I don't know if he's a well-known name here. He probably isn't, but he was just a young Turk in advertising then, and he's now today's marketing guru, always on Radio 4 in the morning when there's anything about marketing. And he managed to get us, he was young and keen, into every important newspaper and periodical. And the result was a sold-out production, which encouraged heated discussion late into the night, even in the face of some lukewarm critical response from the usual suspects. Hello, Nick de Jong. It is difficult to assess the audience definitively, as we had no way of categorizing them. But it may be safe to say it was pretty Catholic, verging some evenings on the side of the academic, with one or two celebrities thrown in. But there were people, ordinary people, who wanted to come and see their revolution on the stage, sing along, dance, move, behave like, well, not really like English audiences should, but did and do, and it's wonderful. I was actually amazed because the show became a hot ticket, as there were even touts on the dark roads that lead to Riverside offering tickets at highly inflated prices. One offered me one and I said, "You think this is a pop concert?" What? So that's very nasty, actually. But sweet music to our ears, because there were no empty seats, you know. The then Haitian ambassador to the court of St. James, Monsieur Duval, funnily enough, a totally elegant diplomat who gave a lot of encouragement and practical help, It was his print of Toussaint resting at the table in full military gear, which he loaned me and allowed us to use for the poster and image of the play. It's become something of a classic, actually, in black posters, and I don't know if anybody's ever seen this before, but that's Monsieur Deval's print, right? And he was sitting next to me on the first night, and it was so unfortunate that he had to leave hurriedly, clicking his heels and bowing and backing out, because he was like that, because the news had been brought to him on that night in February in 1986 of the second Haitian Revolution. We just couldn't believe it. It was, however, in finally finishing, the politics behind the funding, as much as anything else, which made us so determined to succeed. As mentioned previously, this was at the time of the destruction of the GLC. The Talawa production of the Black Jacobins worked hand in hand with Creation for Liberation, a political organization spearheaded by Jacobins, which had also been funded by the GLC in its cultural swan song. Together, Talawa Theatre Company and Creation for Liberation, with the Black Jacobins production on stage in one studio and in the other an exhibition, C.L.R. James, Man of the People, his life and work covering everything: cricket, the politics of the United States of America, Poland, the Caribbean, and Shakespeare, with his fondly held interpretation of King Lear as an anti-monarchist play. Shakespeare, he said, is the most political writer that Britain has ever seen. No wonder you have to love him. And what sticks permanently in my mind about that particular time is a discussion between C.L.R. James and Fenner Brockway. It was amazing. It had all of us just there spellbound. These two old warriors, Fred, I mean, he was 87, I think, at the time. These two old warriors sort of sitting there, going at each other, and it was so scintillating. And Wilson Harris was there, and George Lamming, and it was just, I just thought it was wonderful to have that, even though it meant the GLC was dying. To end, I would like to read C.L.R. James' introduction to the Talawa Black Jacobins 1986 program. I think it's important because I asked him to write it. I say, you always write introductions, how come you're not offering to write one for me? Well, he must. And he did. 2 reflections. Mozart once said, I have a lot of tunes in my head. I want a story. With a great musician, the music came first. The same is true of the drama. I am not a dramatist by nature or inclination, but a play was required. And when I sat down to write it, I was very conscious of what Mozart had said. The play has been successful with audiences in Europe, Africa, America, and in the Caribbean. But nowhere has it swept the audience off its feet. However, it was written 50 years ago, and 50 years is a long time. And what did not happen then can happen now. Lift the curtain, gentlemen. And guess what? It did sweep the audience off its feet to his utmost delight. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Rawle Gibbons and to Yvonne Brewster. That was simply fantastic. And I haven't asked a question all day, so I'm going to abuse my position as chair and ask you, each one of you, a question. So for Rawle, I wanted to ask, we were talking about how the play spoke to, but also how you and Yvonne made the play speak to Haiti in 1986 and Haiti in 1993, the first ousting of Aristide. And in terms of Haiti now, particularly after the earthquake in 2010, I know that you are doing a lot of work at the moment, and I wanted to ask you particularly about your Juve Haïti project. And I don't know if that's so much related to the CLR James plays, but one thing that did interest me about the DVD that you kindly lent me was the way that the cornmeal is used in that, and the representation of voodoo, and the way that the actors kind of white up using the the veve making implements. And then my question for Yvonne was when you were talking about, it was really fascinating. I mean, all of it was really fascinating, and I could sit here all night. But the tangible book memento, and the Carrie Festa and the Errol Hill publication, that was all very interesting, and it reminded me about the correspondence that I'd read in the build-up to the 1967 production of the play between Dexter Lindsay and James, where James, one of the things that he was most concerned about was he wanted it to be published as a book. And he wanted it, I mean, all these kind of variations. His idea was to have a book that would be a chronicle of the making of the Black Jacobins, something like Two for the Seesaw.
Yes, yes.
So that was the idea. And one thing about this play, The Black Jack, which I'm not sure I really know what to make of, is that books have a key importance in the play. And there is, I mean, the famous lines from Rawle, they are in the prologue, although Dexter Lindsay actually added them from the history. But in a bit that James, wrote and rewrote, there's Racine and Iphigénie, and that's something I really liked in your production with Mona Hammond. And I was just wondering, so there's a lot is made of a scene between Marie-Jeanne and Dessalines, and reading Racine's Iphigénie, and I was just wondering, and there's a lot with the book and him kind of sitting on the book, and then all kinds of things happening with the book, and I was just wondering if you could talk about that. So who wants to speak
Rawle first.
Okay, with regard to that political connection, the narrative of the production was placed in contemporary Haiti at the time. We also had a petition that we circulated among the audience, all right, for signature, in support of Haiti, in support of democracy in Haiti. Yeah. So the entire thing was fashioned in that way, and it was Brechtian in a sense, in the sense that it was just the idea of the moving from fiction into action. Juve Haiti is the project that we started out of the presence of Haitian students at the University of the West Indies after the 2010 disaster. The university had admitted about 80-something students from Haiti to complete their degrees on campus. Some were in Mona, some were in Trinidad. In Trinidad, we decided to engage them, all right? And through that, we created a carnival band, because we recognized that carnival was one of the links that we had with Haiti. Jacmel is a seat of carnival in Haiti. So we created a carnival band together that we called Juve Haiti. And what was interesting, it was our first band, it was a Juve band. And Juve in Trinidad is the first part of the carnival ritual. It takes place in the early morning. Juve is Creole, but it translates into the break of day, the dawn, Juve, or whatever, it translates into that. And the question that we put to our students and to the other participants in the band was, what would be a new day for Haiti? So that was the theme of the mass, and that was the question that the students then engaged and answered through creating mass. So it wasn't like your usual carnival band where you design a costume and then everybody come and buy the costume and they jump up and play. Students had to respond to this notion, this question, and they created some fantastic images. We've kept the band going with the same title, Juve Haiti, engaging other questions, but always Caribbean. The next point for us, 2015, we've already decided what we're doing in 2014. But 2015, we are bringing out the band, the theme of the band will be the Black Jacobins. That's the band. And what we are doing, 2015 is Carrie Festa, which Yvonne spoke so eloquently about, in Cuba, in Haiti. Because Black Jacobins, the play, is not yet completed. The same point that I made to you about we cannot complete what we're doing here without mediation by Haiti. It's the same thing that I've imposed upon myself. The circuit of productions, those 3 productions that I've done, can only be completed in Haiti. So the band, but I'm doing it not as theater in that way, but as performance in terms of mass, the art of mass.
It's you say it's a band and it's not theatre. What
It's
about
performance.
Wade? Remember
Yeah.
Professor Hill?
Yeah, I know,
Yes.
I know.
Okay. Because there is a complication here between the academics in the West Indies about whether carnival is theatre or not. And Derek Walker said it is absolutely not, and Errol Hill said it is, and so there are lots of cross letters going backwards and forwards, which make it very exciting. Now, I will be very quick because we don't want to be locked into the building. I think that the job of a director is actually to feel the need, to read the need behind the words, behind the intention, and see if you can get that need over to your cast, and they will do amazing things for you. But I don't think a cast is a swarm. I think a cast needs a leadership, and a cast needs a leadership of the play. And so therefore the play is what is the thing. Thank you.
Thank you.